My evil mother-in-law tried to poison me to abort my baby. 3 months later, I watched her empire crumble when my billionaire husband revealed who he really was. But here's the twist. He wasn't just protecting me and our child. He was settling a 20-year debt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hi, I'm Emma, and I need to tell you about the day I discovered that marrying into money doesn't guarantee acceptance and how my husband's shocking revelation changed everything. Picture this. I'm 24, working double shifts at a diner in a small town called Millbrook, barely making ends meet. My apartment is above the restaurant, and my biggest luxury is the occasional coffee from the fancy machine downstairs. I grew up in foster care, bouncing between homes until I aged out at 18. No family, no trust fund, no safety net. Just me, my determination, and a stubborn belief that hard work could overcome anything. I'd been saving every penny for nursing school, dreaming of a career where I could help people and finally have some stability. That's where I met James. He was different from the usual customers at Rosie's Diner. While most people treated me like I was invisible, James actually looked me in the eye when he ordered. He said please and thank you, left generous tips, and after a few weeks, started asking about my day. James told me he worked in business consulting, traveled a lot for work, but always stopped by Rosie's when he was in town. He drove a nice but not flashy car, wore decent clothes, and had this quiet confidence that drew me in. He never talked about money or tried to impress me with expensive gestures. Our first real conversation happened during my break. I was sitting outside the diner reviewing nursing school applications when James approached with 2 cups of coffee. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Those look important." "Just school applications," I said, suddenly self-conscious about my second-hand textbooks and handwritten notes. James sat down and we talked for an hour about my dreams of becoming a nurse, his appreciation for people who dedicate their lives to helping others, and our shared love of old movies. What struck me about James was how present he was. In a world where everyone's always checking their phones, James gave me his full attention. He remembered details from our conversations, asked thoughtful questions, and never made me feel stupid for not knowing about things outside my experience. We started dating slowly. James respected my work schedule, often showing up at the diner just to chat during my breaks. Our dates were simple: walks in the park, movie nights at my tiny apartment, dinner at the local pizza place. He seemed genuinely happy with these modest outings, never suggesting expensive restaurants or activities I couldn't afford. I fell in love with his kindness, his intelligence, and the way he made me feel worthy of love despite my humble background. James never asked about my family situation, but when I finally told him about growing up in foster care, he held my hand and said, "That explains why you're so strong. You've been taking care of yourself your whole life." After 6 months of dating, James told me he had something important to share. "I'm not exactly who you think I am," he said one evening as we walked through downtown Millbrook. My heart sank, thinking he was married or had been lying about his job. "My full name is James Harrison Montgomery," he continued. "My family owns Montgomery Industries. We're pretty well known in the business world. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to know me for who I am, not what I have." I stared at him, processing this information. Montgomery Industries was a name I'd heard on the news, a massive corporation involved in everything from real estate to technology. "You're rich," I said slowly. "Very rich." James nodded. "I understand if this changes things. I know it's a lot to process." It was a lot to process, but not for the reasons he might have expected. I wasn't angry about the money. I was terrified about what it meant for us. Would his family accept me? Did I belong in his world? "The money doesn't change how I feel about you," I told him, "but I'm scared about everything else. Your family, your friends, people who will think I'm just some gold digger." James took my hands. "My family will love you because I love you. And anyone who doesn't see how amazing you are isn't worth worrying about." Looking back, I realize how naive we both were. James proposed 6 months later, right there in Rosie's Diner where we met. It wasn't elaborate or public. He simply got down on one knee during my lunch break and asked if I wanted to build a life together. The ring was beautiful but not ostentatious, exactly what I would have chosen for myself. Planning our wedding was my first real glimpse into James's world. His mother, Victoria Montgomery, insisted on meeting me at the family estate, a sprawling mansion that looked like something from a movie. I spent an hour getting ready, choosing my nicest dress and practicing conversation topics. Victoria was exactly what you'd expect from old money royalty. Perfectly styled gray hair, designer clothes, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She looked me up and down like I was a stain on her expensive carpet. "So you're the waitress," she said, the word dripping with disdain. "James tells me you work at some local establishment." "It's actually a diner, and I'm proud of my work there," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Of course you are, dear. And what about your family? What do your parents do?" I explained my foster care background, watching Victoria's expression grow more pinched with each detail. She asked pointed questions about my education, my finances, my plans for the future, all while maintaining that cold smile. "How interesting," she said when I finished. "And you're certain you're not pregnant?" The question hit me like a slap. "Excuse me?" "You understand why I'd need to ask. Young women from your background often see pregnancy as a way to secure their future." I stood up, my face burning with humiliation and anger. "Mrs. Montgomery, I love your son. I'm not using him, I'm not pregnant, and I'm not going anywhere." Victoria's smile widened, but it wasn't pleasant. "We'll see about that, dear." The wedding planning became a battlefield. Victoria inserted herself into every decision, vetoing my choices and replacing them with her preferences. The venue, the flowers, the menu, even my dress. Everything had to meet her standards of what was appropriate for a Montgomery wedding. James tried to run interference, but Victoria was skilled at making her attacks seem like helpful suggestions. "Maybe something more traditional for the dress, dear. We want you to look like you belong. Perhaps we should invite more of our friends and fewer of yours. Quality over quantity, you understand." Each comment was designed to remind me that I didn't belong, that I was an outsider trying to infiltrate their world. When I complained to James, he assured me his mother would come around once she got to know me better. He's a good man, but he'd never experienced his mother's full capacity for cruelty. The wedding itself was beautiful, but felt more like a performance than a celebration. Victoria had invited 300 of her closest friends, most of whom I'd never met. My side of the church was nearly empty. Just my former foster sister Maya, a few co-workers from the diner, and Mrs. Henderson, the woman who'd run my last foster home. During the reception, I overheard Victoria talking to a group of her friends. "She'll be divorced within 5 years, mark my words. These girls always show their true colors eventually. She actually thinks she can fit into our world. It's almost amusing." That night, in our honeymoon suite, I cried while James held me. "She hates me," I whispered. "She's always going to hate me." "She doesn't hate you," James said, stroking my hair. "She's protective of the family. She'll see how wonderful you are once you've been married for a while." I wanted to believe him, but something in Victoria's eyes told me this was just the beginning. For the first few months of marriage, things were relatively peaceful. James and I moved into a beautiful house about an hour from his family's estate. I continued working at the diner, despite James's protests that I didn't need to work anymore. "I like having my own income," I explained. "I like feeling useful." James supported my decision, but I could tell Victoria disapproved. Every family dinner included subtle digs about my employment. "Still playing waitress, dear?" How quaint. 3 months into our marriage, I started feeling sick. At first, I thought it was stress from Victoria's constant hostility, but when the nausea persisted, I took a pregnancy test. The 2 pink lines that appeared felt like a miracle and a nightmare simultaneously. I was thrilled about becoming a mother, but terror-free action. James was overjoyed when I told him, spinning me around our kitchen and immediately calling to book an appointment with the best obstetrician in the state. When we told Victoria at Sunday dinner, her reaction was carefully controlled. "How wonderful," she said with that same cold smile. "I suppose we'll need to start planning for the future." She asked detailed questions about my prenatal care, my diet, my exercise routine, all under the guise of grandmotherly concern. A few days later, Victoria called and invited me to lunch, just the 2 of us. She wanted to discuss baby preparations, she said. We met at an exclusive country club where Victoria was clearly a valued member. Everyone knew her, and she basked in their attention while introducing me as James's little wife. Over salad, Victoria's demeanor shifted. "Emma, dear, we need to have a serious conversation about your condition." "My condition?" "I'm pregnant, Mrs. Montgomery, not sick." Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're very young, and this pregnancy is rather sudden. Have you considered whether this is the right time to become a mother?" I stared at her, not understanding where this was leading. "You and James are still newlyweds. Adding a baby to the mix could put tremendous strain on your marriage." Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "I know an excellent doctor who specializes in women's reproductive health. Very discreet, very professional." The business card was for a clinic 2 towns over. As realization dawned on me, I felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with morning sickness. "Are you suggesting I get an abortion?" I whispered. Victoria's expression remained perfectly composed. "I'm suggesting you consider all your options. The Montgomery family has certain expectations, certain standards. A baby right now might complicate things for everyone involved." I stood up so quickly that my chair fell backward. "You want me to abort my baby because it's inconvenient for your family?" Other diners were starting to stare, but I didn't care. "Lower your voice, dear," Victoria hissed. "People are watching." "Let them watch," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You are asking me to kill my child because you think I'm not good enough to be a Montgomery mother." "I'm asking you to be practical," Victoria replied coolly. "You're young, uneducated, from unfortunate circumstances. Motherhood is demanding, and children from unstable backgrounds often struggle with the responsibilities." Every word was designed to cut deep, to remind me of my foster care upbringing and my perceived inadequacies. But something had changed in me since marrying James. I'd found my voice, and I wasn't going to let anyone silence it. "Mrs. Montgomery," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "this baby is your son's child, your grandchild, and I would rather die than let you convince me to harm my own baby because you think I'm not worthy of your precious family name." Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "We'll see how you feel when James realizes what a mistake he's made. This baby will ruin everything. Mark my words." I grabbed my purse and walked out, leaving Victoria sitting alone at her exclusive country club table. But her words haunted me. What if she was right? What if having a baby would show James that I really wasn't cut out for his world? That evening, I told James about the lunch conversation. His face went through several emotions: disbelief, anger, and finally, protective fury. "She said what?" he asked, his voice dangerous in a way I'd never heard before. "She wanted me to get an abortion, James. She gave me a doctor's business card and everything." James stood up and started pacing, running his hands through his hair. "I can't believe she would do something like that. That's beyond inappropriate. That's sick." "What if she's right, though?" I asked quietly. "What if I'm not ready to be a mother? What if this baby does ruin everything?" James knelt in front of my chair and took my hands. "Emma, look at me. My mother is wrong about you. She's wrong about us, and she's wrong about our baby. You're going to be an amazing mother. But what if the stress affects the baby? What if I can't handle the pressure of being a Montgomery wife and mother? What if I mess this up?" James held me while I cried, whispering reassurances that I desperately wanted to believe. The next few weeks were a nightmare of subtle psychological warfare. Victoria never again directly suggested abortion, but she found countless ways to undermine my confidence. She sent me articles about the dangers of stress during pregnancy, the children without family support, the statistics on failed marriages involving significant class differences. She arranged for me to meet other young mothers from their social circle, women who spoke about how overwhelming and isolating motherhood could be. She shared stories about women who'd married into wealthy families only to discover they couldn't handle the pressure. Every interaction was designed to plant seeds of doubt, to make me question whether I was strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough to be James's wife and the mother of his children. The worst part was how subtle it all was. To an outside observer, Victoria appeared to be a concerned mother-in-law offering support and guidance. James could see I was struggling, but Victoria was careful to conduct most of her psychological attacks when he wasn't around. When he confronted her about her behavior, she played the innocent grandmother-to-be, expressing confusion about my sensitivity and suggesting that pregnancy hormones might be affecting my judgment. The stress was taking a physical toll. I lost weight instead of gaining it, had trouble sleeping, and spent most days fighting waves of anxiety and nausea that went beyond normal morning sickness. My obstetrician expressed concern about my stress levels and suggested I might benefit from counseling. At my 12-week appointment, Dr. Peterson noticed my blood pressure was elevated and my overall condition seemed fragile. "Emma, I'm concerned about the level of stress you're experiencing. High stress during pregnancy can affect both you and the baby." When James asked about ways to reduce my stress, I didn't know how to explain that his mother was systematically trying to destroy my confidence and convince me to terminate our pregnancy. How do you tell someone you love that their mother is trying to psychologically manipulate you into killing their child? 2 weeks later, Victoria escalated her campaign in a way I never saw coming. I was folding baby clothes in the nursery when I heard Victoria's car in the driveway. James was at work, and I wasn't expecting her. Through the window, I watched her walk to the front door with purpose, carrying what looked like a small thermos and a bag from the local bakery. "Emma, dear," she called through the door. "I brought you some homemade soup and fresh muffins. You've been looking so thin lately." Against my better judgment, I let her in. Victoria had never brought me food before, and despite everything, a small part of me hoped this might be an olive branch. She bustled into the kitchen, setting out a bowl and spoon with unusual attentiveness. "I made this soup myself," she said, ladling out a rich, creamy mixture that smelled like herbs and chicken. "It's an old family recipe. My grandmother swore it helped with pregnancy nausea." I was 16 weeks pregnant now, and the morning sickness had been brutal. The soup did smell appealing, and I was touched that Victoria might actually be trying to help. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, watching intently as I took the first spoonful. "It's delicious," I said, and it was. Rich and comforting, with a slightly bitter aftertaste that I attributed to the herbs. Victoria smiled, but there was something predatory in her expression that made me uncomfortable. "Eat up, dear. You need your strength." She pushed the bowl closer to me. "I've also brought some literature about pregnancy nutrition." She pulled out several pamphlets and articles, spreading them across the table. As I continued eating, Victoria launched into a monologue about the challenges of pregnancy, particularly for women in my situation. The stress of adapting to a new social class, the pressure of living up to family expectations, the financial burden of raising a child properly. "You know, Emma," she said, her voice taking on that familiar condescending tone, "I've been thinking about our conversation at the country club. Perhaps I was too direct, but my concerns remain valid. This pregnancy is putting tremendous strain on you physically and emotionally." I set down my spoon, the soup suddenly tasting wrong in my mouth. "Mrs. Montgomery, we've discussed this. I'm keeping my baby." Victoria's smile never wavered. "Of course, dear, but have you considered what's best for the child?" Growing up in a household where the mother is constantly stressed, where there's tension between family members. She pulled out a newspaper clipping about a society family's divorce, pointing to a photo of children caught in the middle of a custody battle. "These children suffer the most when marriages fail," she said softly. "Sometimes the kindest thing a mother can do is make difficult decisions before it's too late." I stood up abruptly, my head spinning slightly. "I think you should leave now. I'm not feeling well." Victoria's expression shifted to concern, but something flickered in her eyes that lulled satisfaction. "Oh my, you do look pale. Perhaps you should lie down." She helped me to the living room couch, her hand surprisingly gentle. "Let me get you some water." As she bustled around, playing the caring mother-in-law, the room began to spin more violently. My stomach cramped suddenly, a sharp pain that doubled me over. "Mrs. Montgomery," I gasped, "something's wrong." The pain was unlike anything I'd experienced during my pregnancy, and fear shot through me like ice water. Victoria appeared at my side with a glass of water and her phone. Should I call James? Or perhaps it would be better to go directly to the hospital. She seemed oddly calm for someone witnessing a medical emergency. "Please," I whispered, clutching my stomach as another wave of pain hit. "Call an ambulance. I think something's happening to the baby." Victoria made the call, but as I lay there fighting waves of nausea and cramping, I noticed her collecting the soup bowl and thermos, washing them thoroughly in the kitchen sink. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and Victoria rode with me to the hospital, playing the concerned mother-in-law perfectly. She held my hand and spoke soothingly about how these things sometimes happened, how it might be nature's way of preventing complications. At the hospital, Dr. Peterson ran test after test while I writhed in pain, terrified that I was losing my baby. James arrived looking panicked, and Victoria immediately launched into an explanation about how I'd been under tremendous stress, how she'd tried to help by bringing me soup, how these early pregnancy losses were sometimes unavoidable. After hours of testing and monitoring, Dr. Peterson delivered cautiously optimistic news. "The baby's heartbeat is strong, and while you've had some concerning symptoms, everything appears stable now. However, I'm detecting traces of certain plant compounds in your blood work that concern me." "Plant compounds?" James asked, holding my hand tightly. "What kind of plant compounds?" Dr. Peterson looked uncomfortable. "There are elevated levels of pennyroyal and tansy in Mrs. Montgomery's system. These are herbs that have historically been used to induce miscarriage. They're quite dangerous during pregnancy." The room went silent, except for the beeping of monitors. I looked at Victoria, who maintained her expression of concern while James processed this information. "How would those herbs get into Emma's system?" he asked slowly. "I don't know," Dr. Peterson said. "They're not commonly found in food or over-the-counter medications. Someone would have had to deliberately consume them or have them administered." Victoria stepped forward, her voice full of motherly concern. "Doctor, could stress cause the body to produce these compounds naturally? Or perhaps Emma's been experimenting with herbal remedies for her morning sickness. Some young mothers try alternative treatments without realizing the dangers." I stared at her in horror, realizing what had happened. The soup. She'd put those herbs in the soup she'd brought me. She'd literally tried to poison me to abort my baby. But Victoria was too smart to leave obvious evidence. She'd washed the bowl, taken the thermos, and now she was suggesting I'd somehow done this to myself. James looked confused and frightened. "Emma, have you been taking any herbal supplements, anything for the nausea?" I wanted to scream the truth, but who would believe me? Victoria had covered her tracks perfectly, and any accusation I made would sound like pregnancy-induced paranoia. "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I haven't taken anything except my prenatal vitamins." James squeezed my hand, and I could see him struggling to make sense of the situation. "We'll need to monitor you closely for the next few days," Dr. Peterson said. "These compounds can cause serious complications, but if we've caught it early enough, the baby should be fine." Victoria nodded gravely, playing the role of the concerned grandmother flawlessly. That night, as I lay in the hospital bed with James sleeping in the chair beside me, Victoria leaned close to my ear. "Accidents happen, dear," she whispered so quietly that only I could hear. "The next time might not have such a fortunate outcome. Consider this a warning." I pretended to be asleep, but her words echoed in my mind all night. She'd my baby and was threatening to try again. I was trapped in a nightmare where my husband's mother was literally attempting murder, and I had no way to prove it. The next morning, James brought me flowers and breakfast from my favorite cafe. He looked exhausted, and I could see the strain this was putting on him. "The doctors say you can go home today, but you need complete bed rest for at least a week." Victoria appeared with more flowers and a concerned expression. "I've arranged for a nurse to stay with you during the day while James is at work," she announced. "Someone needs to monitor your condition, and I want to make sure you're getting proper care." The thought of being alone with someone Victoria had chosen terrified me, but I couldn't explain my fears without sounding paranoid. "Thank you," I managed to say. "That's very thoughtful." Victoria smiled that cold smile. Anything for my son's happiness and the health of my grandchild. At home, the nurse Victoria had hired was a stern woman named Mrs. Hartwell, who treated me like an invalid. She monitored everything I ate and drank, claiming she was following strict medical orders. When I asked to see the doctor's instructions, she said Victoria had them and would review them with me later. James checked on me constantly, calling every few hours and rushing home during lunch breaks. His concern was touching, but I could see the stress affecting him too. He looked tired and worried, constantly asking if I needed anything, if I was feeling okay. 3 days into my bed rest, Mrs. Hartwell brought me a cup of tea that tasted bitter and unfamiliar. "It's a special blend for pregnant women," she explained when I questioned the taste. Mrs. Montgomery specifically requested it. "Good for circulation and stress relief." After drinking the tea, I felt dizzy and nauseous again. When I tried to call James, Mrs. Hartwell took my phone, claiming I needed to rest without distractions. When I insisted on calling my husband, she said she'd already spoken to him and he'd agreed I shouldn't be disturbed. That evening, James came home to find me sick again, cramping and frightened. Mrs. Hartwell had left for the day, and I was alone with my fears and physical symptoms. James immediately called Dr. Peterson, who instructed us to come to the hospital again. More tests revealed elevated levels of the same dangerous herbs in my system. Dr. Peterson was baffled and concerned. "Mrs. Montgomery, this is the second time we've found these compounds in your blood. I need to ask directly, are you intentionally consuming these herbs? Are you trying to terminate your pregnancy?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. No, I would never hurt my baby. I don't know how these things are getting into my system. James looked torn between believing me and trying to understand how this could keep happening. Victoria arrived at the hospital with red eyes, as if she'd been crying. She hugged James tightly and whispered something about how worried she was about me, about the baby, about the family. She suggested that pregnancy stress might be causing me to have episodes of confusion or memory loss. "Perhaps Emma needs psychiatric evaluation," she said softly to Dr. Peterson. "Sometimes, pregnancy hormones can cause women to behave in ways that seem rational to them but are actually quite dangerous." James looked shocked at the suggestion, but I could see doubt creeping into his expression. "I'm not crazy," I said firmly, looking directly at Victoria. "Someone is doing this to me. Someone is trying to hurt my baby." Victoria's expression was perfectly composed as she suggested that paranoid thoughts were common during difficult pregnancies. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't prove what Victoria was doing, but I could protect myself. I started pretending to drink the teas and eat the special foods she provided, secretly disposing of them when no one was looking. I also began keeping a detailed journal of every interaction with Victoria, every suspicious incident, every time I felt sick after consuming something she'd provided. Within a few days of avoiding Victoria's food and drinks, my symptoms disappeared completely. The cramping stopped, the nausea subsided, and I felt stronger than I had in weeks. But I continued pretending to be weak and sick, letting Victoria think her plan was working while I gathered evidence. One afternoon, while pretending to nap, I overheard Victoria in the kitchen. She was speaking quietly, but her words chilled me to the bone. "The little peasant is proving more resilient than expected," she was saying. "But patience, darling. These things take time. We can't make it too obvious." She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. Of course James suspects nothing. He thinks she's having pregnancy complications. By the time this is over, he'll be grateful to be free of her and the bastard child she's carrying. I lay perfectly still, recording everything on my phone. Victoria continued her conversation, discussing timing and methods, revealing a level of calculated cruelty that shocked me, even though I'd been living with it for weeks. The next morning, I called Maya from the bathroom while Victoria was downstairs. "I need your help," I whispered into the phone. "James's mother is trying to poison me to abort my baby, and I have proof." Maya was horrified but immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Don't eat or drink anything she gives you," Maya said. "I'm driving up there right now. We're going to figure out how to handle this." Having Maya's support gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. That afternoon, when Victoria brought me another cup of her special tea, I accepted it gratefully and pretended to drink it while actually pouring it into a hidden container. I had been saving samples of everything she'd given me, and Maya was taking them to be tested by a private lab. 2 days later, Maya called with the results. "Emma, everything Victoria gave you is loaded with abortifacient herbs. Pennyroyal, tansy, black cohosh, rue. These are dangerous combinations that could easily cause miscarriage or serious harm to you both. The lab results were concrete evidence of Victoria's attempts to poison me, but I still needed to figure out how to handle the situation. Accusing my mother-in-law of attempted murder seemed impossible, especially when she'd been so careful to maintain her innocent facade. That's when Maya reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. "Emma, didn't you say James told you his family owns Montgomery Industries? Have you ever actually researched what that means?" I hadn't really investigated James's background beyond knowing his family was wealthy. That evening, while James was working late and Victoria thought I was sleeping, I researched Montgomery Industries online. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The company had been involved in several major scandals over the years, including environmental disasters, worker safety violations, and questionable business practices. But the most shocking discovery was a lawsuit from 20 years ago. A wrongful death suit filed by the family of a young pregnant woman named Sarah Chen, who had died after consuming herbal tea contaminated with toxic plants. The tea had been provided by Montgomery Industries, food subsidiary, and the family alleged that Victoria Montgomery had personally overseen the product development. The case had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, and all records had been sealed. But seeing Victoria's name connected to the death of another pregnant woman sent chills down my spine. This wasn't her first attempt at using poisonous herbs to harm a pregnant woman. I screenshot everything I could find and sent it to Maya, who immediately contacted her lawyer friend. "We need to build a case," she said. "Not just for what she's doing to you now, but for the pattern of behavior that goes back decades." The next morning, I pretended to have a severe reaction to Victoria's latest tea offering. I called James in a panic, telling him I was cramping again and needed to go to the hospital. Victoria insisted on driving me, playing the concerned mother-in-law role perfectly. But this time, I was prepared. I had samples of everything she'd given me, recordings of her phone conversations, and evidence of her past involvement in similar incidents. At the hospital, I quietly asked Dr. Peterson to run specific tests for the herbs I knew were in Victoria's concoctions. When the results came back positive again, I finally told James everything. I showed him the evidence, played him the recordings, and explained about the 20-year-old lawsuit. His face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, horror, rage, and finally, cold determination. "Mother," he said when Victoria appeared with her usual concerned expression, "we need to talk. Private. Now." I watched through the hospital room, confronted his mother in the hallway. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see Victoria's mask finally slipping as she realized her carefully constructed facade was crumbling. When James returned to my room, his expression was grim but resolved. "I've called the police," he said quietly. "I've also called our family lawyer and the district attorney. Victoria won't be able to hurt you or anyone else ever again." But James had one more revelation that would change everything. "Emma, there's something about my family that I've never told you. Something I've been afraid to share because I wasn't sure you'd believe me or understand why I've kept it secret for so long." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.